Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode in the Max Rebo Music Theory course.
Hit it, Max.
In the last episode, we learned how the treble and bass clefs can combine into the grand staff, and how ledger lines are used. If you haven't seen that video yet, or just want a review, I'm going to put the link in the top right corner and down in the description below, since everything that we talk about today is going to make a lot more sense if you understand that material first.
A great leap forward often requires first taking 2 steps back.
We've seen on the piano keyboard that there's a repeating pattern of 7 white keys and 5 black keys. And every time that that pattern starts again, we'll be returning to the same note name or letter that we began with. For example, if I start on this A, I can follow the pattern of white and black keys right or up on the keyboard until I get to that point in the pattern again. This means that I've reached the next A and traveled the distance or interval of an octave. Now, we'll talk more about this concept of the octave when we get into intervals later on.
I find that answer vague and unconvincing.
But the octave is the distance between one note and the next note of the same name. And what we see is that we end up having a bunch of the exact same note name throughout the keyboard. In this case, A.
There's just too many of them.
There are too many of them. What are we going to do?
So just like every clone trooper that looked the same but really was slightly different,
My designation is Trooper 27-5555, sir. We call him Fives. I'm Heavy. This is Echo.
each of these notes is assigned a different number. This number is based on how high or low the octave is that that note is in, and we call these octave numbers. So when I ask a cellist to play a C, I can actually be more specific by asking specifically for a C2, C3, C4, or C5, and so on. Now, this naming system gets a little weird. In our modern convention of tonality, we tend to use C as a starting point since that's where we would begin to have a major scale with no alterations known as accidentals or sharps and flats, which
Good question. For another time.
So even though A is the first letter and starting point of the alphabet, we're going to be using C in music as the starting point for these octave numbers. And if we go all the way to the lowest C on the keyboard, that will end up being C1, and where the first octave of notes begins. So as we look at the other higher notes before the next C, each of those would be referred to with octave number 1. This would be D1, then E1, and so on, ending in A1 and B1 before we reach the next C. As we get to the next C, we begin octave 2, and now all of the note names are followed by the number 2.
Always 2 there are. No more, no less.
This trend continues and the octave number increases each time as we reach the next C. So this would be C3, C4, C5, C6, C7, and C8. There are pitches above C8, but for our purposes we'll stop here since this is the end of the piano. But let's go back to the other end of the keyboard, because here we actually have a few notes below that C1. These notes would therefore be part of octave 0 in music, so we would name these as A0 and B0. Now, as Star Wars fans, I think the best place to start would be C3 for C-3PO as the second space in the bass clef.
I am C-3PO human-cyborg relations. I beg your pardon?
And I am C-3PO, human-cyborg relations.
Boo, C-3PO. Like a tutor od Mishka Jabaduhat?
Another way to easily remember this is to focus on the number for middle C, which we talked about in our last lesson as the C on the ledger line in between bass and treble clefs. The octave number for middle C is 4, making this note C4. That can also be an easy one to remember for Star Wars fans, since C4 is an explosive material, and there is certainly no shortage of explosions in Star Wars. So, those are our octave numbers and how we read them, and you probably noticed that we began using a lot more ledger lines for the higher and the lowest notes. It's very common to run into situations with a performer when you need to specify a specific octave number when verbally communicating about music, so it's a good thing to master before we go any further. And I encourage you to practice this on your own as well to help translate the music you see. My next video will discuss the smallest intervals of a half step and a whole step, and the use of accidentals to create a lot of these on the keyboard.
I'm looking forward to completing your training.
But let me know in the meantime if you have any questions about octave numbers. And as always, may the be with you.